Hello everyone and welcome to the after show for the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge after the third day of preliminary action, the last day of preliminary action. This is the day where we know who are the qualifiers for the quarterfinals and who could potentially win this event. It was a stressful day for the world champion, Magnus Carlsen, who was on the ropes a little bit today, but did end up qualifying. While, for example, Hikaru Nakamura, who was at the top of the standings, coasted through today. We are going to look in some detail at today's action, but because this is the Lindores Abbey tournament, we have the hashtag HeritageChess, and I did want to talk to you a little bit about today's featured story, which is the story of the Armenian chess miracle. And this is a story that I know reasonably well myself because, believe it or not, but the first international tournament that I played in all the way back in 1997, if you imagine, that makes me older than some of you, surely. But in 1997, I played in Armenia in my first international tournament as a young Canadian. I played in the under 16 tournament. I think I was 14 years old at the time. And so I got to learn a little bit about the country, and it is a country of chess. And you can feel that when you're in Armenia. You could feel it back in 97. I think you can still feel that today, but it is a country that breathes and loves chess. For a nation of just a few million people, they have had a phenomenal chess history. And a country that has also had some tough times, but a very rich history, chess and otherwise. We go through some of this in this article by Andrei Terehov. It's available on chess24.com. It's one of the featured stories today, so you can easily find it. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. If you don't know too much about Armenia, it's a country that's strategically located between a few larger countries such as Turkey, Iran, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and there have been conflicts in the past with those countries. It's a country that was part of the Soviet Union. When I went there in 1997, it was a country that was just emerging from Soviet rule, and as such, it was a difficult place. Sometimes the power would go out. Sometimes you would have to take the stairs because the elevator is not working. Sometimes you would try to take a shower and the water would be cold, right? And so just imagine that for a country that's so small to have such strong chess players, and some of the players that are talked about here. And also, so Armenia was one of the first, I believe, Christian countries ever. I think in Yerevan, which is the capital of Armenia, there is actually one of the first churches. I remember going to, there's some really incredible history there, and they have gone through sort of various periods, right? The Romans, Parthians, Persians, Arabs. So there's been many different sort of foreign presence there. And you can tell there that it is a very proud nation. And if you've met Armenian, they are very proud, very kind people. I had an amazing time when I was there. I actually went twice, in 97 and then in 1999. Just a fascinating country. Of course, in the tournament here, we have Levan Aranyan, who is playing, and turns out that I also know him very well because we were both from around. I was born in 83. I think he's 84. I think he's 82. I think he's just a year older than me. But I had the pleasure of meeting Levan. He's a very kind, very funny guy, very sort of self-effacing, an incredibly talented chess player. By most accounts, I think he is probably, in the top 2 or 3 most talented players out there. I always thought he has a great shot at becoming world champion. He's struggled a little bit in the past, sort of putting it together in the key moments. And so he's able to beat anyone. He's absolutely brilliant. But then somehow it's hard for him to have, like, let's say in a candidates tournament, it's been a struggle for him to kind of put together all the wins to win that tournament. So he's always a force to be reckoned with. Definitely one of the best players in the world, and certainly one of the most talented players. He also had a little bit of a different. He didn't, become 2750 at age 16. He had a bit of a slower path. It was clear that he always had this immense talent, but it took him a few more years. He follows some storied players. So the article speaks about Kasparian, who is a well-known player, but even more so, he's a well-known puzzle. What do you call it? Some puzzle inventor, composer. Composer is the word. So if you like puzzles, Kasparian has some incredible studies. There's one of them in the article. There are many more. You can find books with them. They're incredible. And studies are a mix of sort of chess knowledge, chess calculation, but also a lot of creativity. And it's quite different from to be very good at solving puzzles or studies like this one here. Is quite different from necessarily being an incredible chess player over the board, although most of the top players, and certainly Levon Aronian, for example, was incredible at solving puzzles like this one. Then, of course, there's Tigran Petrosyan, who was world champion, a player that really needs no introduction. And you can see, for example, one of his classic exchange sacrifices in this article, Rook E6, that he played here. And, of course, a legend in Armenia. He's been followed by players like Vaganyan. Some people probably know that Kasparov's name was actually Kasparian. So there's all the names that end in IAN are typically Armenian, if you have not noticed that yet. And yeah, another thing that is hard to miss with Armenia is that they have done incredibly well at the Olympiad. They actually won in some of the Olympiads where I participated. I played in the Olympiad from 2000 to 2008. 5 Olympiads for Canada, and Armenia did win, I think, 2 of these. And yeah, they've always had this sort of incredible team spirit. They did go through some hard times. One of their players, Karen Asrian, who was a very, very nice guy, passed away at a really young age of 28. And then tragedy, of course, struck again this year. I don't want to talk about it too much, but Levon Aronian, kudos to him for playing in this tournament. He did lose his wife. I'm emotional myself talking about it. I didn't know her as well. So, but yeah. So, yeah, really storied chess heritage from Armenia. There's also what they call the diaspora. I believe that it is a fact that there are more Armenians outside of Armenia than in Armenia. In the United States, particularly on the West Coast, in the LA area, there is a very large Armenian community with some amazing players. Sam Sivyan is a young, I think he's got to be 19 years old now, something like that, 2,650 or so. Very, very strong, talented Armenian player. Akobyan, Tatev Abrahamyan, who's been on the women's team for a long time, very strong player. And then there's also, I'm not sure if he's mentioned in this article, but there's Melik Kachian, who is a well-known coach in the LA area, and he has also worked with Levon Aronian and is one of the most reputable coaches in the United States, one of the guys with the best students, and he's a super nice guy also, and very respected. So this is my tidbit about Armenia. I talked about it maybe a little bit more than some of the other ones because it's one that I feel is close to my heart. I've always had a soft spot for Armenia, maybe because I went there when I was so long. And so anyway, thanks for listening to this. We're gonna go back. Yeah, we're gonna go back to the chess now. And so I was going to show you, first of all, let's look at the standings before we move to something else here. How do I do this? Here we go. I'm a little bit slow today. Bear with me. All right, so these are the standings, and we see who made it and who did not make it. It's a little bit like a reality TV show. We are saying goodbye to 4 players today. It's not a real goodbye, though, because they are going to be doing some banter blitzes. I'm hoping some of them may join us for commentary. You guys and gals have spoken, and Grischuk is a very beloved commentator. And so I suspect that he will be there with his traditional dear viewers. But I suspect he'll be back within a couple of days. But unfortunately, Alex Grischuk did not qualify. Firouzja did not qualify. Duda did not qualify. And Wei Yi, who was actually, his result is a little bit deceptive in that he did play okay, but he just kept running low on time. And so maybe not too accustomed to this time control. The other ones, this is just a very strong field, and it's hard to say that anyone was, should have qualified or was more deserving than somebody else. This was very close. I think a little bit sad to see Ali Reza go just because he's, we of course like these young players to shine in these tournaments, but he's gaining experience and he will surely be back. I will also show you, before we move on to the actual games, I did want to show you the pairings. So the pairings for the quarterfinals are set. Hikaru Nakamura, who finished first in the standings, is playing against Levon Aragnan. Magnus Carlsen is going to play against Wesley So, and that's a really tough. I mean, all these matchups are tough, but this is a tough matchup for Magnus. Wesley is very, very solid, doesn't lose a lot of games, and they did play in Fischer Random when Wesley became world champion in Fischer Random. So yeah, that's going to be a tough match. Then we have Yu Yang Yi against Ding Li Ren. Interesting matchup, of course, between two compatriots from China. And finally, two Russians, Dubov against Karyakin. And what is sort of a clash of styles, right? Dubov plays a lot of different openings, very dangerous. Karyakin kind of rock solid, plays often the same openings, but knows them in and out. And he had really a good performance in this particular event. I meant to take out the other thing underneath here. But with that, let's go through the chess. So here we go. You should see a chessboard appearing any second. All right, so there was a lot of action. I'm kind of going to go through round by round. The first round was a quiet round with five draws, which, we've seen a lot of these rounds with like 4 wins. That was not the case in someone is asking me in the chat, by the way, am I surprised that Dubov went through while Alireza didn't? It's hard to be surprised that Dubov went through. I mean, he did win the World Rapid Championship in 2018. Really, I don't think there's any surprise for any of these guys to go through. But Dubov in particular, I think is very strong in rapid. Yeah, there's really not too much of a surprise. That Alireza didn't go through maybe is a surprise because he did have some incredibly good results in rapid in the past. But he's struggled also in the Magnus Carlsen Invitational. So it's normal when you're 16 years old, you're going to go through some ups and downs. And for him, maybe this is the first what you might call a down period for him. He had a very successful Weikanze. And then since the pandemic and these online events, he's had 2 in a row that were not that great. But keep in mind, he had just won the Banter Blitz Cup, beating Magnus in a 3-minute match, which is not easy to do. And yeah, so it's just a couple of rapid events. Am I surprised? Maybe a little bit, but these things happen. And I think you can go through streaks when you're at that age. It's maybe a little harder to recover than it is when you're like Magnus, have all this experience. He bounces back incredibly fast. So here we go. So the first game I wanted to show is the first decisive game of the day, and the only decisive game of the 9th round, which is the first round that was played today. They played 3 rounds, 9, 10, and 11 today, between Ding Li Ren and Jan Christoph, whose name I never pronounced correctly. And so they play this opening. I would just alert you to the fact that this is a slightly different variation from the position that arises here. And it's important to maybe make that distinction, although ultimately they actually did transpose. But there are some distinctions where here both knights are already out, while in the game position, when white plays knight f3, black plays e4, that knight doesn't come out. It does come out a little bit later, but it's a slightly different move order. And so when he plays it here, this is a different position than the one they normally get in this 4-knight variation. So he plays knight d4, and this becomes sort of a missed experiment for white, I would say, in terms of the opening. So far, nothing really wrong. But here, e3 is probably the start of things not going right. These weaknesses on the light squares begin to show very quickly, and so I think this is a move e3 that won't be repeated. White has played. I think this has been played in the past, and maybe even now playing e3 is more reasonable. And I wonder if because at least you've weakened that structure, while in the game this knight comes to haunt black. And I wonder if Jan Christoph maybe just messed up the move order here. that he had prepared. So he plays e3 first. Now after bishop g4, queen c2, bishop h3. So he invites the repetition with bishop g4 here. But black now is very happy to get this endgame. And really after this, Ding makes it a sort of an endgame clinic. But this is already a really tough endgame for black. So we'll just go through it quickly. I did want to show, but white is probably close to being lost. I mean, it's just this bishop, which is right now looking at 3 pawns, and there's a nice, very solid pawn chain here. This bishop is just a complete dud. And so naturally, Duda tries to bust this pawn chain a little bit, but it's just too little too late. But Ding here plays a very nice move that you have to spot in order to win very quickly. But he plays g5, and then it's actually amazing how terrible this position is for white, because it looks like, okay, you're suffering, they've got some nice knights, but is it just going to collapse? And this is already just collapse. You can't actually save you can't save this position even from losing a piece within a few moves. So it was kind of wild. Okay, someone in the chat is asking, am I going to address the Twitter drama between Naka or Magnus snapping at poor Jan? So I wouldn't say that Magnus snapped at Jan. I think, Magnus did not have the best day at the office today from a chess perspective. He, and he's not had the best tournament. And so, everyone's allowed to be in a bit of a bad mood sometimes. And yeah, it sounded a little bit like a snap, but I think these guys know each other so well that it's a little bit jokey as well. Then in terms of the other question about the Twitter drama, I mean, I wouldn't ignore it, of course. I think what you have to keep in mind is that Chess24 and Magnus are putting up a very significant amount of money for this tournament to happen, and so therefore, it feels like at least having some name recognition that Chess24 is putting up this tournament is helpful. And I think that's really the source of it. But in the end, of course, we realize that all of this is good for chess. Even a little drama is good for chess. And I think all in all, this is an amazing event, and I don't want that to get in the way of what's going on. So that will be that. But in this position, so the threat for black is simply to play g4, and this knight has issues. But more than the knight having issues, white is going to be in almost a mating net after rook f6 and rook f2. And so we can look at a few variations, but he plays g4. There's not a lot of moves other than g4. h5. Now, one fun one to see is that if he plays h3, knight g3 is a very beautiful checkmate. We've seen a couple of these weird knight checkmates in this tournament, so I almost had to show this game because of this mate. It's like I can't resist it once I see it, right? It's like I gotta show this game. There's a crazy knight mate. All right, so after a takes b6, a takes b6. This position is just actually totally busted here. If he takes on h5, for example, g4, knight h4, and again, it's this rook f6 idea. And rook f1 is not a good defense because that bishop on c1, we can actually take it. Of course, you don't want to get rid of that bishop, but now here, this is just a mating net again. So this position is just going to be made in a few moves. We also could take on f1 first, and then take on c1. But I think this is just mate with rook d2 and something like rook f2. You could also take on h2. So anyway, total disaster game for Duda, who he's extremely strong. He's another one that it's surprising to see him go. But you know what? I think any of those guys, Grishchuk, it's surprising to see him go. These are players who are everyone is so incredibly strong. We have the crème de la crème, as we say. We like to say it in English, but I pronounce more the French way. But really nice game where Ding Liren made him look bad, which is always a sign of a very strong player when you make somebody look bad. All right, next game I wanted to show was a game that was important for Mr. Grishchuk, also important for Firouzja, but because he won and didn't end up qualifying, it turned out to not be as meaningful. I like to show the games that I think are meaningful for the standings, but also are instructive to look at and that I think are entertaining. So this game starts as a King's Indian. This game is a must-win for Ali Reza, so not surprising that he choose an enterprising opening. But keep in mind that the King's Indian is very much in his repertoire, right? He plays the King's Indian frequently. Grishuk goes for the bayonet attack, which was sort of the most ambitious way to meet the King's Indian. Maybe still is, but now a lot of players with white have opted for less theoretical setups, playing like h3 or bishop e2, bishop g5, or different things, but still very much a relevant variation. And Ali Reza goes for a variation that's very sharp. Often in these lines, black is going to play f5 and white will play knight g5, knight e6, and then it's a question of whether black can encircle that pawn and take it with impunity, or whether they can take it and white gets all kind of counterplay on the light squares, or whether they can even keep the pawn. And this is essentially what happens in this game. I'm not in love, frankly, with the way that black plays this variation here, but although it ends up working for him, but we'll go through it. So here they have sort of a funny little repetition. Ali Reza plays bishop f6. I don't actually think Grishuk was going to make a draw if he repeated. But here I start to dislike black's position quite a bit. After knight e6, this is sort of forced. So f4, again, is more or less forced because otherwise this bishop is going to be a monster on this diagonal. And so he plays f4. Knight d5, very natural move. That's usually what follows this knight jumping on e6. We create a nice square. The knight can't be so easily kicked away because this pawn hangs. So it's nice to get it there before black sometimes plays c6, although I don't think he would have done it in this position. Knight g7. And now I think Grishuk maybe made a mistake. I mean, he went for a move that was very deep. What I would call a deep move. He played a5. But this is essentially a pawn sacrifice. He could have just played bishop g4. Of course, this is a move. This is the first move that you consider. This is the first move that Alexander would consider. And I think this position after h5, which is very natural, bishop h3, g5, and then we just play f3. I really like this position for white. I think it's going to be very difficult for black to get this pawn without playing, say, g4, and then we take, and then we can take on h5. And I don't think black, has a very good position here. We also have the idea potentially to play g3 and, try to open things up at the right time. And, we can just make moves like queen b3, rook c1, or, it just seems to me like things have gone quite wrong for black here. So I don't like black's position at all here. But Alexander plays a5, and after pawn takes, he plays bishop g4. So this is sort of deeper. He wanted to be able to play rook b7 and just thought, this pawn in theory is strong, but in practice it's never going to get to really haunt me that much. I might even be able to capture it with queen a4. He just decided that it wasn't that big a deal. He, I'm sure, ended up regretting it in a few moves. So I don't think the position is not by any means clear yet. But I think already it's this pawn becomes a very nagging problem. Rook b7, a3. So Ali Reza now, and by the way, this is like sort of the rest of this game is Ali Reza at his best. It's a messy, wild position. There's stuff happening on both sides of the board. Positionally, it looks like a disaster for black, really, because they have this bishop. They don't have their light squared bishop. It looks like this pawn is very strong. So positionally, it looks like a disaster. But tactically, who knows? There's always g4 in the air. This pawn, of course, now cannot be stopped from getting to at least a2. So it's just a mess, right? It's like there used to be there was a book by Alexei Shirov called Fire on Board. This would be a great position for fire on board. So Alexander plays bishop c3, probably a reasonable move. a2. Now, queen c2, I think, is the start of things going wrong. It looks like maybe it was time to play bishop a1, just put a stop to this pawn pushing further before moving other pieces. And of course, it's easy to say with the hindsight of what happened. But after queen c2, Alireza finds a very nice sequence. He plays g4, and this was always in the air, right? The question is at which moment is it good and at which moment is it bad? Pawn takes g4, knight takes e6. Now this is the idea, and black, notice that with this move, knight takes e6, black is covering the c7 pawn. And the other thing is that after pawn takes h5, black has the very strong move knight c5, which attacks the rook. And that really kind of turns things around here for them. And then let's say the rook moves to, I don't know, let's say b4. Well, every square has a problem, right? This square, there's knight c6. The rook actually kind of runs out of good squares. Now we play knight d4. Now we're threatening c6. So this rook has some sort of surprising problems. You can't go here because of knight takes d5. So after knight e6, white can't play g takes h5. And I'm pretty sure this is what he missed because in the positions with the rook not on b7, then g takes h5 was good for white. So he goes rook a1 here. But now things are already sort of beyond repair. Knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, knight g5. He's targeting that bishop. And finally, white is able to get rid of that pawn, but it's too little too late. And there's a tactical reason here. Rook takes, queen c8. He's attacking this. And, sorry, bad arrow here. He's threatening pawn takes g4, and the bishop is in the back. So now this is actually completely losing. And this becomes sort of a typical King's Indian gone right. From what looked like it might be a King's Indian gone wrong, now black is on the verge of winning a bishop completely, right? And yeah, this is just over already. So he plays rook b8, queen d7. It doesn't help. Pawn takes h5, forced. Otherwise, he's going to lose that whole bishop. Knight h3, pawn takes, queen takes. He's attacking the bishop. The bishop moves, king h8, threatening rook g8 with an eventual checkmate. And the rest is easy peasy for black. Now they're threatening this, so everything is collapsing. So nice game by Alireza. For example, the game could finish like this. Well, actually, here you just take. Yeah, there's no move here. So yeah, really nice game. Sort of the Alireza that we have been used to seeing, right? Winning games that are messy, crazy. Yeah, so really interesting. Next game I wanted to show you is, I have to show it because whenever Magnus loses, like it or not, it's a big event. That's what happens when you are the world champion. This game, I'm not going to go through it all, but I would just point out that Daniel Dubov has been trying to revitalize this variation of the Philidor, which is, at least as far as I know, has normally been considered to be a slightly worse, we've talked about this, the e4 pawn structure versus the d6 pawn. I mean, the old masters would say, well, you have a little bit more space, and there's nothing that black has really to compensate for that space, right? The e4 pawn is sort of rock solid, but Dubov has been making a case that maybe this is quite playable. Maybe too early to say. I also don't know if this is something that he likes to play in rapid chess. Would he love to get this position in a slow game against Magnus Carlsen? We'll see. I honestly have no idea. So, but it seemed to me like Magnus got a very good position again. Nothing crazy. This is sort of typical. The pawn on b2 usually leads to a trapped queen. I think it works. I looked at this briefly. And there's bishop f1. Yeah, so we at least win something. Take on e4, something like this. We can take a piece. So that pawn is always poisoned. But Magnus does play b3 just to be safe. Rook d8. Yeah, and I feel like this is a very pleasant position for white. On the other hand, the thing that black has is that if they keep their position together, and they can make moves fairly easily, right? All these moves, bishop d7, bishop c8, you play these in the King's Indian. This actually looks very much like a King's Indian with g3, except that in the King's Indian with g3, that pawn on c2 would be on c4 with pluses and minuses for that. And maybe then white would have kept their pawn on a2. But if you put that pawn back here and this one forward here, you basically have a King's Indian. the pawn on c4 weakens the d4 square. On the other hand, it does, cover d5, so it makes it harder for black to reach that pawn break. But now Magnus plays f3, and I think everything here is quite good, except that maybe he underestimated Dubov's next move here. And this is one of those things. Black has basically 2 pawn breaks here. They have h5. I'm messing up my arrows today. H5 is one, and then the other one is d5, which d5 for now, it doesn't really seem too feasible. But there are positions in the Philidor where you tolerate e5, and it just gets to be a messy position. But of course, the main thing is that often white can take, and if you just get an isolated pawn, then it's not a great position, right? So anyway, Magnus plays queen f2, and now Dubov comes up with a very interesting sacrifice, plays h5, and that was a cool move after g5, h4, because if he just plays knight h7, h4, this position is preferable for white, I think. Again, it's that space versus what's the compensation, and there's probably not enough for the space. But h4 is really cool. He does this, bishop takes, knight h5. He's getting squares, right? These squares. And suddenly the position is much easier to play for black in practice, and maybe even, objectively at least equal, if not better for black. But in practice already, it's definitely easier for black to play. He achieves the d5 break, and his position it's very active. This king on h2 suddenly is feeling a little bit overexposed. Now I'll fast forward a little bit. There were this is a rich position, where both sides could have tried a lot of different ideas. But fast forward to this position, it's pretty clear that white was never better here, but he certainly had chances to hold. And so here, Magnus plays knight e2, knight c3, and here this is one of Magnus's probably most inexplicable blunder. He still had about a minute on his clock and just played bishop f2 and left his knights hanging. This is when you can use a quote like, world champions, they're people too. But Magnus has had, a few more blunders in the last few days than he has, maybe in a few years. So we do hope that he finds his game, because his chess is so amazing to watch when he's on point. But yeah, so here he blunders the piece and of course resigns. Let's not though focus only on the blunder, and remember that Dubov did put a huge amount of pressure by finding this very creative pawn sacrifice. So and even in the final position, like just a move here, the computer gives it as roughly equal, but even a move before black was much better according to the computer. So it was not, it was not by all means like Magnus was better the whole game and then hung a knight. It wasn't like that. This was a very sharp, complicated game where Dubov put a lot of pressure on him. So kudos to him. Next, I thought it would be important to show one game from Hikaru, because he is the man who is leading the event. And his style is a little bit unorthodox. So I thought this game was actually fairly a good representation of his style. Hello, Fuxia in the chat. Bishop a4 is an odd move, but it has actually been played a lot by players, even like Magnus himself. It's it's a hard one to explain, frankly. I like to try to explain everything. Why do you need to play the prophylactic bishop a4? Essentially, one of the ideas, at least as best as I can explain it, is to play c4. And it can be helpful to make this move first. It's also interesting that after knight f6, there's no actual threat to the e4 pawn, because if you take it, this has been analyzed, but you get into all sorts of pressure on the, you get all sorts of pressure here with d4, and it's pretty unpleasant for black to play these positions. But anyway, this has all been sort of worked out over the years, and sometimes this leads to Maroczy type positions, but Hikaru just plays it with d3, so he doesn't play d4. And if you look at Hikaru's games, he does seem to really enjoy these sort of closed, slow build-up structures, and he's extremely good at creating these attacks in these positions, and also at sort of calculating transitions of pawn structures. And so we'll see what happens in this game, and it's not... I don't want to take too long because I've already been talking a whole lot today. it certainly didn't seem like he had anything special here. Now suddenly though, he gets f4 in, and so he has a bishop that's not particularly good on b3, but he does have some kingside play to compensate for having sort of the worst minor piece. But I think this position is probably objectively about equal, with play for both sides, and this is what Hikaru wants. Just a very playable, complex position. He's very good at playing fast. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He's incredibly strong in any of these rapid time controls. I want to fast forward to the key moment. So here, Hikaru plays d4, and this is allowing this f5 d4 is sort of a brave decision for white. But Hikaru always trusts in his calculations because it seems like things might be getting a little loose, but it does seem to work out okay for white. Now, Duda, however, quickly collapses here in a position that's still just very, very messy. So he plays fe, which is reasonable, knight e4. And now he just makes actually a decisive mistake, believe it or not. Plays knight a4, natural move, but it just fails tactically. So in this position, it seems like it was time for black to say goodbye to that bishop and try to play against the a2 bishop. And this position looks, I looked at it for a bit. I think black is probably fine here, something like this. This bishop is kind of ugly. It's staring at a c4 pawn that's never really going to be able to move anywhere, most likely. And it doesn't have that square just yet, and probably can come back there at some point. And then this center, white doesn't really want to take because knight takes gives the knight a good square. I think white is okay, but it doesn't look like more than okay for white to me. But Duda plays knight a4, and now watch how he gets punished here. This is sort of Hikaru at his best. Rook b2, which looks strong, and I think this is why Duda went for this. But now queen h4, and black is suddenly completely lost. This is actually like the computer gives it as +7, I think. And it's actually very beautiful the way this game ends. So ed, normal move. If you take on a2, then I think just this is extremely strong. The pawn is going to be a monster. We have knight f6 coming, knight g5. So this should be very bad. So he's got to take now knight f6, king h8, pawn takes d5. Bishop b5, and now the bishop gets overloaded. Bishop c4, great move, sort of a old school overloading tactic. It reminds me of this famous Philidor game, right? I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about. Maybe some do. Fuxia says in the chat, that her favorite Naka game is Charbonneau Nakamura from 2010, a Philidor Gambit. I do encourage all viewers to look at that game just so that they will feel good about listening to me. That was not Hikaru's brightest spot, but to be fair, it was a bad opening. But I will tell you one thing about that game. It's the only game where my opponent checks me with queen e7 check. Right, my king is on, checks me with a queen here. My king is on e1, and I make the move king d1. And it's completely, king d1 is extremely strong and completely winning. So I'm not going to show the game because that is the kind of boasting that I'm not going to do. However, you can search for it. If you search on the internet using a website such as Google, or if you have a database, you can actually find it in the Chess24 database. You can find that game. But anyway, going back instead of talking about myself, after bishop c4. The bishop is overloaded, and we get to see what happens after bishop takes c4. Bishop d7, by the way, if you try to keep it, it doesn't help at all. This is played, followed by rook e7 on either capture, really. Here, rook e7, let's say queen f5, and we can play just bishop d3. So everything, this is an overload, so to speak. This is not the only way. You can also play queen f6. And this is also completely winning. So everything kind of wins for white here. So he takes the bishop, might as well take a piece. Rook e8. The threat is rook takes f8, followed by queen h7. Or for the, there's also ideas. There's other ideas, but this is the main threat. h5, sort of the only move. Knight d7, he's attacking this knight. Suddenly all the pieces are roaming around the black king. So this is just a disaster. He makes a few moves just for kicks and giggles, and really nice win by Hikaru, and impressive play in this tournament so far. He's been solid. He his openings have been holding. He hasn't suffered as much with black as he did in the last event. So yeah, just well played by him so far. Last couple of things I want to show you today. What I consider to be the move of the day here is in a game that was relevant for the standing. This is in round 11. This is in round 11. And Yu Yangyi had big chances to qualify, but he really found a way to cement it here. So he plays G takes F4, and here Duda had to kind of bail out. He had a chance to bail out by trading pieces. Black has to take with the rook, because otherwise, if you take with the bishop, this is not a fun pin to live with. So he's got to take with the rook, and then like white is in no danger of losing. Of course, in this position, he's also not posing any threat of winning either, because after let's say king f7, king f3, king e6, king e4, bishop f6, this is just symmetrical pawn structure. So just a drawn endgame. But that's what he had to do. He plays instead the natural bishop b2, and now watch this move. I love this move. Knight f5. This is again about all these mating nets. If white plays the natural take on d5, not knight e3 check, but rook e2 check. And now the king is completely stuck, and on either of these captures, it's just mate in one. So same thing with king h. Whoops, I touched the wrong piece there. Sorry about that. So after knight f5, white takes on f4, and then unfortunately, Yu Yangyi messed it up here. He had a quite beautiful win at his disposal here by playing first rook takes d2. And the idea is that we have all kinds of forks. So if rook takes d2, then simply knight f1, and the rook is falling, and after that there's going to be rook e2. So it's even worse than just a rook falling. And so he's got to take with the knight, and then on taking with the knight, we don't play knight d1 because then knight e4 is not so clear, but we go back to that same mating net, amazingly. So now we have the same sort of idea, and after, let's say, king g2, play rook e2, king f3, rook e3, king g2, and now this position is going to be completely lost. It's almost a mating net depending on where black goes, but we go rook g3, and then on king h2, rook d3, and now this pin is, sorry, I'm really struggling with my arrows today. I'm just going to give up, I think. But this pin is lethal here, as you can see. So he messed it up in the game, a few more complications, but I think he thought that maybe he could win this endgame. Turns out that it was a draw. So, but Yu Yangyi qualified, and I thought that knight f5 move was beautiful. And then the last thing I wanted to show you was the end. So Magnus actually had a chance to not qualify is a weird way to say it, but there was a chance for him to be eliminated if he lost in the last round, and but he managed to pull through in a rather nice finish here against Ali Reza. I'm sure that since the Banter Blitz lost, he has looked to show the kid, so to speak. Fuxia says, first win with black in this tournament. I had not really realized that, but that's a nice fact. So here, I think Ali Reza went a little bit wrong, maybe over ambitious, or, just he knew he had to try to win. There were more solid moves than taking on d4. Like, for example, he could try to take on c4, not let a pawn end up on d4 and try to tolerate this knight. The problem is that in some cases, black will have some kind of perpetual, right? Like this knight e2 is threatened, so you probably have to play bishop f1, which allows knight f3, and so it seems like black is okay. But he plays bishop takes d4, and now Magnus gets a really active position, and you can sort of, as you look at this, you can tell yourself that it's unlikely that this is right for white to do this, because these two pawns are just, too strong. He plays bishop h3, eyeing the e6 square, rook d6 to stop bishop e6, queen a2, and now this is a beautiful move, but for someone like Magnus, this is a very easy move, rook b3. It's an exchange sacrifice, but really it kind of plays itself because having that pawn on b3, sort of trapping the queen almost, It just seems so natural. Alireza decides to take this, but now after d3, followed by bishop d4, the position is just collapsing. And the rest is nice as well. There's not really much that white could have done to save this game, I think, at this point. Magnus takes a piece. And here now he's got 2 pieces for a rook. I don't know what it is, but it seems like in every single game, Magnus ends up with either a rook versus 2 pieces or 2 pieces for a rook. I think he's had more positions like this in the last 2 tournaments than I've had in 10 years. So pretty amazing. But so in this case, though, it's not really a position, so to speak. It's because it's completely lost for black at this point. Completely lost for white, I should say. Yeah, rook b3 played instantly. Yeah, I think I'm sure he had planned it, and for him, it's this kind of exchange sacrifice is pretty much automatic. I think it would be automatic for any of those players, really. Here he traded queens, which is sort of the safe way to play it. I think if he had been in his best mood, he might have played bishop e3 and try to win without allowing a queen trade. It looks like this is going to be crushing, knight f5. But he decided to really play it safe. There's no doubt that he's completely winning in this position either. In fact, his technique is nice. I just thought he would checkmate white, and Alireza resigned. So Magnus qualifies. Let me show you again the pairings for the quarters. So again, Hikaru playing Aragnan, Magnus against Wesley So, Yu Yang Yi against Ding Li Ren in a matchup of 2 Chinese players, and then a matchup in the under semis of Daniel Dubov versus Karyakin. Interesting to note that Magnus and Hikaru could meet again in the semifinal after their tough match in the Magnus Carlsen Invitational. A little Twitter war. Maybe this could be fun. I do hope to see it. Although I also have a soft spot for Levon, and I always hope that he does well. So it will be very interesting, and I'm certainly looking forward to the next stage of this event. So with this, I think that's going to be it for me for today. Tomorrow we have a free day for the players, but it is not a free day at Chess24. We are going to have Banter Blitz in several languages. Ding Li Ren, Daniel Dubov, Levon Aragnan, I believe. I think Aragnan will be in English. Yeah, so it should be really interesting. Also, there will be a new fantasy chess contest posted this evening for the quarterfinals. So we're going to have one for the quarters, one for the semis, one for the finals. I encourage you to do that and to take part, win some prizes. And then finally, I would say check out all these articles that we're posting on the Heritage of Chess. They are fascinating, even for someone like myself who has followed some chess history for 30 years. I'm learning a lot reading this stuff. They're really well done and very interesting. So take a look. And on that note, I'm going to wish everyone to have a pleasant Thursday evening. It's a hot one, I think in a movie, today is going to be a scorcher. Today is a scorcher. I think it's like 95 degrees outside. And my 1 and 3-year-old are hopefully in the pool. But on that note, I'm going to let you guys go. Stay tuned for more action on Chess24, and thanks for joining me tonight.